The first thing to go was the horizon. 1 second it was there, a clean white line where the sky met the mountain pass in a glare of hard daylight, and the next it was shredded by trace of fire. The air itself seemed to rip, orange streaks lancing through the pale haze, stitching across the shallow snow wall the patrol had clawed up around themselves. "Contact front! Contact front!" someone yelled, voice torn away by the wind and the ripping crack of incoming rounds. The squad was dug in barely knee-deep, a thin crescent of bodies pressed into the snow. Their position, such as it was, hugged the mangled carcass of a tracked utility vehicle that now smoked in ugly puffs, dark against all that white. Slugs chewed through the snow wall, spitting ice crystals into faces and open mouths. Men and women crouched behind their rifles tried to sink lower, wishing the snow were deeper, wishing they were anywhere but here. In the middle of that chaos, the green K sat in the drift like something out of place. Hard shell, scuffed, its corners strapped down with webbing so it wouldn't slide away in the recoil of explosions. A few bullet scars marked one side where rounds had hit and deflected. No one was shooting at it deliberately, not yet. The shooters up on the ridges were doing exactly what they were trained to do. Fix the patrol in place, bleed them slowly, and herd them toward something wise. "Rourke, I've got nothing on A. No bird within 100 clicks," the grizzled sergeant bellowed over the din, hunched beside the captain behind a shattered boulder. Captain Rourke didn't answer. His jaw was clenched so tight it hurt, his breath puffing in frantic bursts. He kept his eyes on the ridge line through a haze of blowing snow and cordite. Somewhere up there, invisible behind rock and drifts, the enemy had carved firing slits and dug weapon pits. Somewhere up there, someone was reading the valley like a map and dropping rounds wherever he wanted. Rourke's radio hissed on the ground beside him, the long whip antenna twitching with every concussive blast. "Mayday, this is Frostbite 1. Troops in contact, grid." The young corporal on the handset tried again, voice thin and strained. The words dissolved into a roar of white noise, a grinding wall of static that swallowed the rest. "Nothing," the corporal panted, scratching at the side of the set. "So, I can't. It's like they're sitting on top of us. Signals getting chewed." Static squealed, dipped, then coughed out broken ghosts of other voices. Command net traffic from somewhere else in the mountains, chopped into unhelpful fragments. "Say again. Negative air. Storm front. Repeat. No." Then nothing but a low, steady buzz. The corporal pulled the headphones off one ear, eyes wide. "They're jamming us." Rourke didn't bother to ask if he was sure. He could feel it. Somewhere close, a portable jammer was drowning them, smothering every shout they tried to send skyward. The first mortar round landed long, far up valley, a heavy thump that sent a pulse of snow cascading from an overhanging ledge. The second stepped closer, off their right flank. The third landed almost on top of them. The world became white and sound. Powder detonated outwards in a rolling cloud, a solid wall of snow and ice and dirt that slammed into faces and open mouths. Someone screamed, thin, high, then abruptly chopped short. A body tumbled in the air, arms outstretched, weightless for a hitch of time before hitting the ground hard and rolling. Rourke tasted blood and powder. His left ear rang in a shrill, constant tone. He pushed himself up, feeling for his rifle, trying to blink the sting out of his eyes. "Mortars are walking in," the sergeant roared unnecessarily, pointing to where the smoke of the last impact still boiled. "They've got us dialed." No kidding, Rourke thought. The impacts were too precise, too disciplined. This wasn't harassment fire. Someone up there knew exactly where they were, and exactly how far they could run. "Where's our overwatch?" he yelled. "Where's my shooter?" He twisted, peering toward the rock lip they'd designated for their sniper. 20 meters back, up a slight rise, a low ridge of stone jutted from the snow. From below, it looked like salvation, decent cover, a view of both ridges, the perfect place to put a long gun. Corporal Nadia lay there, belly down, half buried in snow. Her rifle rested against the rock, barrel camouflaged in white tape, muzzle poking out over the edge. Through the scope, Her crosshairs tracked something up on the ridgeline that Rourke couldn't see from where he sat today. "Nadia," he bellowed, throat raw. "What are you waiting for? Take the shot." Her gloved finger was on the trigger. It just didn't move. Another burst of machine gun fire raked their position from the left, rounds tearing past overhead, snapping like angry insects. Someone to Rourke's right cried out and slumped into the snow, clutching at a leg that was suddenly leaking red, stark and obscene against the white. Rourke's pulse surged. The kill zone was working exactly as designed. Pinned patrol, narrowing options, a sense of inevitability settling over everything like the snow itself. He could feel the trap closing with every mortar step. He looked back at the sniper, still flat behind a rock, still motionless. "Do you copy?" he shouted into his MIC. "Corporal, answer me." No reply, just the wind and the drum of impacts. "Nadia, talk to me." Silence. "She's frozen," the sergeant snapped, ducking as another burst chewed the boulder. "So, we have to move that flank before they box us in. She's just lying there." Rourke's vision tunneled. Another mortar landed closer, pelting them with debris. The radio lay useless. The green case sat between them and the wounded, a silent, stubborn weight. "Corporal," he roared one last time. "Shoot back or give me my damn position." Still nothing. Something in him broke. He turned to the nearest private, a skinny kid with snow caked in his eyelashes and a 1,000-yard stare already forming. "Torres." Rourke snarled, grabbing his vest. "You see her? You see that sniper position?" Torres nodded, mute. "Get up there. Punch her in the jaw if you have to. Wake her up. Now." There it was, the order, jagged and ugly in the frozen air. The kid blinked, stunned. Then training took over. He nodded again, more sharply this time, and hunched into a sprint, boots hammering the packed snow as he scrambled toward the sniper's nest. Machine gun fire chased him, throwing up fountains of white at his heels. "Cover him," the sergeant roared, popping up to lay down a short burst, others joining in. For a few seconds the valley roared with overlapping gunfire, muzzle flashes stabbing at the haze. Torres reached the rock lip in a spray of powder and flung himself over it, half expecting to be shot in the face by his own sniper reacting on reflex. He hit the ground, rolled, and came up with a fist cocked, heart racing. There was no one to punch. The sniper's mat was there, half buried, the faint outline of her body melted into the snow where she'd lain for hours. Her rifle lay propped against the rock, but closer inspection showed it was the backup carbine she carried, not the precision weapon she favored. A hollow in the drift marked where a rifle case had been recently lifted. Boot prints dotted the snow behind the position, small and neat, already softening as the wind pushed fine powder into them. They led away along the ridge, not down toward the squad but higher, angling sharply toward the steep rock faces. On the far side of the valley. "Sir!" Torres shouted, bewildered. "She's gone." Back behind the boulder, Rourke swore viciously. A fresh mortar round slammed into the far edge of their position, throwing two more bodies into the air in a sick parody of weightlessness. "Gone?" he snapped. "What do you mean gone? She deserting in the middle of—" Torres ducked as a round pinged off the rock. "Sir, she left. Tracks go up, not down. She took her main rifle and just went." The captain pressed his forehead against the icy stone, eyes squeezed shut for a heartbeat. "Of course she did," he thought bitterly. "Of course the one with the long gun walks out on us when it counts." He forced his eyes open, forced his attention back to the kill zone, back to the here and now. His people were bleeding. The case sat between them and oblivion. The sky was empty of friendlies and full of storms. He didn't see what the camera, if there had been one, would have seen. High above them, the valley narrowed to a knife edge of rock, a ridge so thin the wind seemed to cut through it. Along that impossible line, a lone figure moved, small against the expanse of snow and stone. She was a speck trudging into the teeth of the wind, bent low, a rifle case slung across her back, footprints already filling behind her as if the mountain were trying to erase her. The traces that filled the lower air couldn't quite reach that high. The mortars walked the valley floor, not the upper walls. Up there, It was just the wind, the fragile crust of snow, and a path fit only for goats and people too stubborn or desperate to know better. Her name was Corporal Nadia. She did not look frozen. She looked like someone who had already decided that the only way out was through. To understand why she had left the only cover she had, why she was moving alone into that white maze while her squad was being methodically cut apart below, you had to go back to the moment they'd stepped into this valley, when the snow was still clean, the air still quiet, and death was only a possibility, not yet a certainty. Hours earlier, the same valley had lain under a gentler sun. The cliffs rose in the same jagged lines, the drifts curled in the same sculpted shapes, but there had been no traces, no explosions. Only the crunch of tracks on frozen ground and the distant, lazy calling of a raven circling high above, watching. Back then, nobody had been shooting at them. Back then, the green case had been just another piece of cargo. Back then, the only person who seemed to feel that something was wrong was the quiet sniper on the last vehicle, her scope already picking out ghosts in the snow. Dawn came to the outpost in shades of blue. The mountains were still more suggestion than shape, their black bones hidden under a skin of ice and half-light. Flood lamps bathed the motor pool in yellow, carving a little island of color into the pre-morning gloom. Diesel coughed. Men and women stomped their boots against the cold, and the breath of every person and machine rose in ghostly plumes. A line of tracked vehicles idled, exhaust drifting along the wire fence. Beside them, a lone snowcat sat, its open back stacked with gear crates and rucks. The air smelled of fuel, frost, and the burnt coffee someone had abandoned on a crate. Inside the briefing tent, a portable heater hummed. Its glow made the laminated map at the front of the room look almost warm. Captain Rourke stood beside that map, a wooden pointer in one hand. The route traced in red marker climbed out of the valley where the outpost crouched, wound its way through a series of switchbacks, and then crossed a narrow gap between two stylized peaks marked White Pass. At 0840, we move, Rourke said, his voice steady. Our job is simple. We babysit the package across the pass to Relay 9, hand it off, and get back before the storm rolls in. In by noon, out by 1500. It's a postal run, not a war. A low chuckle moved through the assembled squad. Most were already in their winter gear, jackets half-zipped, gloves tucked into belts. They shifted their weight from foot to keep warm, steam coiling from mouths and noses. On a table beside the maps sat the green case. Up close, it showed its age, scuffed metal, old stencils painted over by new ones, the addition of a bright barcode sticker that looked almost indecently modern. Two padlocks hung from reinforced latches. At the back of the room, a young officer from Signals hovered near it like an anxious parent. This, Rourke said, tapping the case with a pointer, is our reason for being on this lovely walk. Inside is a hardware core for the early warning network, new cryptographic unit. Right now, our sensors out here are operating on a redundant mode. As long as this thing doesn't go missing, we stay ahead of any surprises from across the line. If it does go missing, he let that hang. The weather officer cleared his throat, stepping forward. His parka was still half on, sleeves dangling. We're expecting a front to move in around 1700, give or take, he said, pointing to a crude radar print tape beside the map. You'll have clear skies over the pass until mid-afternoon, then cloud thickening, winds picking up. If you're still up there when this hits, Satlink goes from spotty to useless. Rourke nodded. Which is why we're not going to be up there when it hits. Enemy activity during daylight has been low the last month. They prefer nights, weather, shadows. So we're threading the gap, broad daylight, in and out before they know we're there. We've got eyes in the sky for as long as the satellites can see you. What about once we're in the valley? Someone asked from the second row. Those walls get pretty steep. How's reception down there? The weather officer made a face. You'll have dead zones, no question. There'll be stretches where your radios talk to each other, and that's it. Hire wants you to send situation reports at the entrance and exit points. If something goes wrong inside, he shrugged, deal with it locally. The squad grumbled good-naturedly. Local problems. Local solutions. Same as always. Rourke scanned the faces in front of him. They were a mix of old hands and newer arrivals, soldiers who'd been in these mountains for months, and those who'd never seen snow before they got off the transport plane. His eyes paused on the ones he knew he'd rely on most. Sergeant Harville, whose beard looked like frost had decided to settle permanently on his chin, leaned casually against the far wall, arms folded. Even half asleep, Harville radiated the kind of competence that calmed people down. His job was to keep the squad moving when the plan met the mountain and lost. Beside him stood the comm specialist, Tully, a lanky kid whose radio pack looked bigger than he was. He had a pencil tucked behind one ear and a habit of scribbling on any flat surface when his hands weren't on the handset. Near the edge of the group, half in shadow, Corporal Nadia lurked like she'd been painted there and only just remembered to move. Her winter gear was zipped correctly, her gloves were on, her kit was squared away, and her eyes were on the map. She could have been a poster soldier if not for the fact that she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else but in the middle of a crowd. The long rifle case propped against the wall behind her spoke for her. Matte, scratched, familiar. Next to it leaned a shorter carbine, snow wrap visible beneath the torp. Someone in the back nudged their buddy and muttered just loud enough for the front row to hear. Guess we're babysitting the ice princess with a long gun again. A couple of snickers. Harville's eyes flicked toward the sound, narrowed, then moved on. Rourke pretended not to hear it, but he did. Everyone did. Nadia heard it too. Her jaw tightened by a fraction, enough that someone watching her closely might have seen it. No one was watching that closely. Rourke cleared his throat. Corporal Nadia, he said, pointing at a spot on the map above the red route. You'll be our overwatch. You ride last on the way in. Then we peel you off onto the southern ridge as we approach the pass. Give us eyes up there. Keep the angles clean. If someone's been stupid enough to dig in above the route, I want you finding them before they find us. Yes, sir, she said. Her voice was soft, but it didn't waver. And this time, Rourke added, voice sharpening, if you see a threat, you take the shot. There are no second guesses on this run. No conscience debates. Clay. Something flickered in her gaze, a memory, dark and quick. Yes, sir. Clay. The room held its breath for a second. Tully shifted his weight, the radio pack squeaking. Outside, a vehicle revved a little louder. Rourke tapped the route again. We step off in 20. Check your gear. Check your buddies. Check your ego at the door. We're not heroes today. We're bodyguards for Metal Box. The squad began to break up, the murmur of conversation rising. Harville moved to herd them toward the exit, checking helmets and straps as they went. The signals officer hovered to attach an extra locator beacon to the green case, hands fussing. Nadia waited until the crush had thinned before moving. She lifted her rifle case with practiced ease, slings settling onto her shoulder. As she reached for the long barrel, a hand brushed her arm. Rourke. He watched the others go, then looked back at her, expression neutral. I know what happened in Kestrel, he said quietly. Her throat tightened. The word carried with it old ghosts, a street choked with dust, the echo of shots between buildings, a woman's silhouette framed in a window, and a decision that had felt like stepping off a cliff. I made the call I was trained to make, she said, just as quietly. Maybe. Rourke's eyes were unreadable, but that call left 3 of ours on the ground. This is not Kestrel. Up there, if you hesitate because you're chasing a clean conscience, you'll get my people killed. Hear me? She swallowed. I hear you. He nodded once. Good. Then let's not have this conversation again. Outside, the cold hit like a slap as she stepped out of the tent. The sky was lightening, the eastern horizon edging toward gold. The vehicles idled, engines rumbling. Snow squeaked under boots. Someone laughed at a joke about frozen fingers and coffee that tasted like burned tires. Nadia walked to the last vehicle in the column and climbed onto the back, finding a spot on a crate, legs braced. The long rifle rested across her knees, her glove hand smoothing an invisible imperfection from a stock. The convoy rolled out through the open gate, treads grinding. The outpost shrank in the side mirror, its walls and towers soon swallowed by the folds of the valley. As they climbed, she raised her optic and scanned the ridgelines. The world narrowed to arcs and angles. Distances. Shadows. A faint line of scuffed snow up a cliff face caught her eye. Too straight for natural rockfall, too recent to be old. A set of parallel grooves led to where someone had hauled something heavy up toward a shelf. She shifted the optic, tracking along the ridge. A patch of snow that looked wrong. Smoother, too smooth, as if something lay beneath it. The ghost outline of tops, maybe, or a dug-in position that had been carefully dressed to look like untouched powder. She frowned, lowered the glass, looked around at the others in the vehicle. Havel was smoking, cap pulled low, watching the road ahead. The soldier beside him was humming tunelessly into a scarf. "Sergeant," Nadia said, leaning toward him. "You see the South Ridge? About 2 clicks ahead? There's always something with you," one of the others muttered, just loud enough. Havel turned, squinting up at the rock. From his angle, it was just a wall of snow and stone. No context, no little tells. "All I see is more rock, Corporal," he said. "You want to call it in?" "If they've staged up there, we're driving into a funnel," she said. "Look at the slope angle. It's perfect for—" "Hey," he cut in gently. "I get it. You've got the sniper eyes. That's why we're happy you're back here and not up front driving. But we've got a schedule to keep and a storm that doesn't care about our feelings. You think it's a serious enough threat? Tell the captain. Otherwise, let's not turn every goat path into an ambush." "Yeah." Her jaw locked. She looked again through the optic, seeing the scuffs, the smooth patch, the possible lines of fire. The problem was, she couldn't see people. No muzzle flashes, no glints of glass, no movement. Without concrete proof, it was just a feeling. A pattern that matched memory. "Forget it," she said, settling back. "Probably nothing." The convoy wound higher. The road narrowed, switching back along the flank of the mountain. Trees thinned, giving way to low scrub and rock. Patches of old snow clung to shadows, hard and dirty. They passed an abandoned shepherd's hut near a bend in the track, a huddle of stone and timber half buried under drifts. Smoke stains blackened the stovepipe, fresh against the snow. A trail of footmarks, relatively new, led from the hut up toward the high ground. Nadia's gaze snagged on them. Her hand tightened on the rifle. "Sergeant," she said again. This time he followed her line of sight more carefully. He saw the boot prints, narrowed his eyes. "Locals," he offered. "Trail runners. Plenty of hardy idiots live up here. Maybe someone squatting." "The pipe's still warm," she said. "Snow melt pattern. Someone's been using that hut as a stopover. And those tracks," she paused, pausing their spacing. "Those are load-bearing. Whoever made them was carrying weight. Smugglers, then. Or hunters. Not our problem," Havel said. "We're on a clock, Corporal." Over the radio, Tully's voice crackled. "White base, this is Frostbite 1. Departing grid 6-3. ETA to pass entry 1100. Copy storm front window. Repeat, copy weather window. We'll be on the other side before your radar gets bored." Higher command answered with a calm monotone. Confirmation codes exchanged. The storm was still hours away. Plenty of time, on paper. Nadia tilted her head back and squinted at the sky. A lone raven circled above one particular ridge, riding the updrafts. It wheeled once, twice, its shadow briefly crossing her face. She watched it until it slipped out of sight over the crest. Her mind flicked, unbidden, to Kestrel. The street had smelled of dust and old oil. Her scope had been trained on a second-story window where intel said an enemy spotter would appear to direct fire on a convoy. Instead, the shape that stepped into her crosshairs had been a girl, not yet 20, an infant on her hip. The girl had looked straight down the scope, as if she somehow knew. Her finger had refused to move then, too. She'd held fire. Seconds later, 3 armed men had pushed past the girl and out onto the balcony, firing from behind her. By the time she'd adjusted, taking one, then the second, then the third, they'd already chewed through the lead vehicle's windshield. 3 in her unit had died in the time between refusal and acceptance. Afterward, in the debrief room, someone had called it career suicide under their breath. No charges, No official reprimand, just a shift in how people looked at her. As if the word sniper didn't quite fit anymore. Up here, the mountains didn't care about her past. The snow took footprints from friend and foe alike. The valley ahead narrowed as they filed into it, cliffs rising on either side. The noon sun bounced off the white walls, turning the world into a blinding tunnel. The sound of the engines echoed oddly, contained. The green case bumped gently against its restraints with each jolt, humming with its own quiet significance. Nadia's gut twisted, a knot tightening. Something about the way the snow drifted in the lee of certain rocks. Something about the absence of birds now. Something about the way the air felt thinner, like it was waiting. She lifted her optic again, scanning the high ridges, and saw it. A tiny flash, just for a heartbeat. Glass-catching light, then vanishing. Her breath caught. "Captain, this is Nadia," she said into her MIC, voice low. "Recommend brief halt. I've got possible glass on the south ridge. Request permission to dismount and glass the line." Rourke's reply came a second later. Clipped. "How solid?" "Single glint. Could be scope, binos, or junk glass. It's on the most advantageous overlook for the kill box." She didn't bother to sugarcoat it. There was a pause filled with engine noise and crunching treads. "Negative on halt," Rourke said. "We're eating into the window. Intel says low probability of contact in daylight. Keep moving, Corporal. If they're there, we'll flush them." Flush them, she thought. Like birds. She looked again through her optic, trying to find the glint. The ridge stayed back, blank and white and innocent. Her finger hovered over the push-to-talk. She could push harder, insist, gamble what was left of her reputation. Instead, she let the button go and exhaled slowly, the air fogging in front of her. They rolled deeper into the valley, the cliffs closing in. High above, on that same ridge, partially buried in the snow behind a torp-colored as rock, a man adjusted his spotting scope and watched them come, eyes flat and patient. He knew exactly where they'd stop. He had already walked the pattern in the snow, carefully, precisely, days ago. On his signal, charges buried under the root would turn the valley from a quiet corridor into a cage. The squad below drove on, oblivious. By midday, the light had sharpened to something almost metallic. Shadows were short and hard. The convoy's engines sounded smaller in the throat of the valley, their noise swallowed and thrown back by the rock walls. "Feels like we're in a pipe," Tully muttered, adjusting the radio headset on his ears. "Can't even hear my own thoughts." "Maybe that's a blessing," Havel said, trudging beside the lead vehicle. They'd dismounted to reduce the profile, walking alongside the tracks like an escort. Snow squeaked under every step. Nadia, riding last, had dismounted too. Her rifle slung across her chest, she walked backward, watching the entrance they'd just passed through, then turning to sweep the ridgelines ahead. The faint unease in her gut had not left. It had grown. "Captain," she said again over the net, voice low but steady. Glint confirmed. "South ridge, 200 meters above our current position. Elevation 30 degrees. Something's up there." "Copy," Rourke replied from the middle of the column. "Any movement? Personnel? Weapons?" "Negative. They are screened. But the angle is bad for us. It's—" Her words were cut off by a sound that, for a split second, didn't register as danger. A dull crump, as if someone had slammed a door in another building. The second sound clarified things. The entire world kicked. The lead vehicle lifted, tilted, and ripped itself apart in a blossom of snow, metal, and date. The shaped charge buried beneath the track directed its fury upward into the underbelly, gutting the engine compartment and flinging the chassis sideways. The blast punched a hole through the snowpack, throwing a plume of white and black into the air. For a moment, everything was soundless. The air was too shocked to carry noise. Then the boom arrived, a physical slap that hit the eardrum late. "Ambush! Ambush! Ambush!" Voices shouted over each other. Nadia staggered, one hand on her rifle, eyes already tracking up toward the ridges. "Back! Reverse!" Havel roared at the driver of the last vehicle. The soldier scrambled to comply, gears grinding. and the trail vehicle drove its rear treads directly over the second charge. Another eruption. Another pillar of snow and flame. The last vehicle lurched sideways, its track thrown, its rear compartment torn open like a tin can. Just like that, the valley had them, blocked front and back, the column pinned between two burning hulks. Someone out there had studied the terrain, walked it, measured distances, pre-sighted arcs. They knew exactly where vehicles would slow, where the walls narrowed, where the snow hid rock and where it hid steel. The kill zone was live. Down! Get off the road! Move! 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 Rourke roared, his voice half thought, half reflex. As the echo of the second blast faded, the real shooting started. Heavy machine guns opened up from the north ridge, their thunder raw and immediate. Bullets tore into the middle of the convoy, punching through doors, shattering glass, sending shards of plastic spinning. From the south ridge, disciplined rifle fire licked down, single shots and tight bursts, searching for targets. The air turned into a lethal lattice. Snow around them chattered as rounds struck, sending fountains of powder upward. The squad threw themselves into what little cover existed. The lee of the crippled vehicles, shallow scoops hastily dug with boots and hands. Tully hit the ground hard, the radio pack slamming into his back. He rolled behind a wheel well, fumbling for the handset. Frostbite 1. Troops in contact. Grid, he managed, voice high and fast. The reply was static, not the usual crackle of distance, but a rolling, grinding roar that drowned everything. Base, say again. Tully shouted. We ow in, we ow. The static stayed, dense and impenetrable, with a weird, rhythmic undercurrent, like a low mechanical heartbeat. Nadia flinched as a round snapped past her ear. She dropped into the snow, swung her rifle toward the south ridge, and tried to locate the muzzle flashes. But the enemy shooters were disciplined. Their positions were dug deep, barrels protruding only enough to fire before disappearing. Radios fried. Tully shouted toward Rourke, ripping the headset off one ear. They're saturating the band, sir. It's not natural interference. It's a jammer. Of course, Nadia thought. The smooth patch, the scuff tracks, the warm stovepipe. They'd been living here, staging, testing their lines, laying their charges, tuning their equipment. Find it, then, Rourke snarled, firing a burst toward a shape on the ridge. Find the jammer and kill it. Easier said than done. The valley hammered at them. The sound was constant. The deep, chest-thudding bark of the machine guns, the sharp cracks of rifles, the whomp of mortars thudding into the snow further up the slope, ringing the air. A round hit the ground near Tully, punching through his leg just above the knee. He screamed, a raw, animal sound, clutching at the wound as blood spilled hot into the snow. Nadia's head snapped toward him. For a moment, everything narrowed, the sight of his fingers slipping on his own blood, the radio headset half-hanging, the antenna jerking with every movement. A mortar round landed close with a terrifying whoosh-whomp and knocked the radio set sideways into the snow. The blast lifted Tully half off the ground and dropped him again, his scream cutting short. Everything was moving too fast. Medic! Harville bellowed, already crawling toward Tully. Get that kit open. Nadia slid behind the broken carcass of the last vehicle, heart hammering but hands steady. She pushed the fear down, the sound down, everything down until only angles remained. Geometry saved lives. Panic killed. She peered through the scope, ignoring the chatter of rounds chewing the snow around her. The ridge lines resolved into arcs of fire in her mind. The mortar impacts, one short, one long, one just right, traced invisible lines back toward a hidden observer. South ridge, center mass. She muttered to herself. Mortar observer's not on the tube. His eyes in. He'll be where he can see the whole bowl. She tracked along the ridge until she found a slightly raised knob of rock with an unnatural line of shadow behind it. Good vantage. Good protection. A stupid place for a sunbather. A perfect place for a spotter. But between her and that knob, the ground dropped away steeply. From her current position, she could see the top of the rock, but not whatever lay behind it. Any shot she tried would be blind, a guess. Corporal, Rourke yelled, huddled behind the forward wreck. I need those gunners suppressed. I see them, she called back. But their pits are too deep from here, sir. I need a different angle. Let me move to the side ridge. I can get above the... Negative. Rourke's voice cracked like ice. You stay in your assigned lane and do your job. We're not playing mountain goat games while we're getting torn apart down here. So, if I climb the goat path we passed, and get yourself killed before you fire a shot, he snapped. We'll lose our only long gun and gain nothing. You are Overwatch. You Overwatch. You don't go on solo field trips. The words hit harder than any ricochet. Nadia clenched her teeth, eyes on the ridge. The unstable cornice she'd noted earlier loomed above the south wall, a lip of snow hanging over nothing. Beneath it, she saw, now, the faint zigzag of an old path, barely more than a smear on the rock, leading up toward the upper reaches. It was, objectively, a terrible route. Too exposed, too narrow, too visible once the enemy realized someone was on it. And yet, from up there, the arcs shifted in her mind. The mortar observer's hide was no longer behind a rock, but beside it, flanked. The machine gun pits that were now just slit shadows would become open mouths from above. The smooth patch of snow that hid whatever generator powered the jammer would be there too, its contours less forgiving when viewed from a high, oblique angle. She flicked her gaze back down. One of the younger soldiers, Jensen, was firing wildly over the hood of a wreck, eyes squeezed nearly shut, rounds going nowhere useful. Another private cowered behind soap-thin cover, hands over his helmet. Tully lay still now, Havel pressing bandages into the wound with brutal efficiency. How much ammo you got up there? Havel shouted, not looking at her. 5 mags on me, she called back. More in my pack. Then use it. Rourke barked. Shoot something, Corporal. She did, forcing herself to pick the least protected heads that popped up between rocks, taking careful shots that at least made the enemy duck. But it felt like bailing out a sinking ship with a tin cup. Every time she bought them a second, the machine guns dug in deeper, the mortar walked closer. Above the noise, she thought she could hear something else, a faint tremor in the snowpack, the far-off crackle of an approaching storm front. The sky over the pass was still clear, but clouds were smearing the horizon. Storm's going to cut air in a couple hours, Tully had said earlier, smiling like it was a joke. We'll be drinking hot chocolate by then. If they didn't change something, they wouldn't see the clouds roll in. The valley floor would be their whole world, reduced to a thin, bloody smear under the next salvo. She ducked as a bullet whined past, close enough to make her flinch. Fear was there. Of course it was. It was always there. But there was also the cold, clinical part of her brain that had kept people alive before, the part that had screamed during Kestrel and been ignored until it was too late. Now that part whispered with brutal clarity, we stay here. We die here. She looked again at the goat path, at the cornice, at the ridge line beyond. She looked at the radio lying useless in the snow beside Tully, at the blood seeping into the drifts. She listened to Rourke's voice barking orders that only rearranged the pieces in the kill zone, but never took them off the board. Jam's still up. Tully gasped weakly, eyes glazing. We're shouting into a pillow. Jam is up, she repeated in her head. Jam is up. Observers up. Guns are up. And we're down. Corporal, status. Rourke snapped over the net. She stayed at the path. She made a decision. Status, he repeated, louder. Working it, she said, voice unnaturally calm. Stand by. She clicked off her MIC and, for the first time since the first charge blew, she stopped shooting. Behind her, the snow on the valley wall waited, its fragile crust not yet broken by human weight. Above, the ridges loomed, indifferent. In the distance, somewhere beyond the peaks, thunder grumbled. The constraints had stacked themselves neatly, jammed comms, wounded radio man, dwindling magazines, terrain turned hostile, a storm marching toward them on a schedule the enemy had surely factored in. All the doctrine in the world said, hunker, return fire, wait for relief. Her instincts, honed through years of being right too early and punished for it, said, Get up, get out, go where they don't expect. She took a breath so cold it burned, then moved. It started with a lull. Not a ceasefire. This enemy was too disciplined for that, but a flicker in the tempo. One of the machine guns on the north ridge stopped abruptly, its belt finally chewed through. The loader scrambled to feed a new one, hands fumbling in the cold. The incoming fire didn't stop, but it misaligned for a moment. A brief, fractional slack in the invisible net. Nadia had been waiting for exactly that. She slid backward off her shooting mat in one smooth motion, keeping her profile low. Snow filled the depression where her body had been, the imprint vanishing even as she moved. She grabbed her rifle, hugged it to her chest, and crawled along the lee of the rock lip, away from the direction of the fire. Behind her, Jensen's panicked burst stuttered and then steadied as Havel shouted something at him. Rourke, focused on the immediate crisis, did not see her vanish. The wind stole the small sounds of her retreat. She dropped off the lip, sliding on her side down a short slope to reach the shadow of a jutting boulder. Snow packed into her collar and down her sleeves. She didn't stop to shake it out. She used the momentum, rolling into a crouch and darting toward the valley wall. Bullets chased her, but most of the enemy fire was still oriented toward the obvious threat, the cluster of bodies and vehicles on the valley floor. For the moment, she was a ghost moving in the peripheral vision of the kill zone. At the base of the cliff, she pressed herself against cold rock and sucked in a breath. The world narrowed to the rasp of her own lungs, the thud of her heartbeat, and the screaming ricochet of rounds off stone 10 meters away. The goat path lay ahead, a faint line where the snow thinned, cutting diagonally up the face. To get to it, she had to cross a 15-meter stretch of open slope that offered no cover and would be clearly visible to anyone watching from above. Crazy, she muttered. This is crazy. But staying put while the enemy ran their carefully prepared script was crazier. She checked her gear with brutal efficiency. Excess kit would slow her down and kill her, so excess kit had to go. She unclipped her ruck, dug through it with rapid hands, and pulled out only what she needed, extra magazines, which she stuffed into pouches on her vest, her compact med kit, a small range card, and a laminated map that she folded and slid into an inner pocket. The rest she shoved into a shallow depression under the rock, scooping snow over it until it vanished. If she made it back, she could retrieve it. If she didn't, someone else might someday stumble across a small cache of abandoned gear and wonder what story it had once been part of. Her primary rifle, a long, heavy-barreled instrument made for precision, she slung across her back, barrel up. Her shorter carbine, previously in the Overwatch nest as a backup, would stay behind. She didn't have the hands or the weight allowance for both. Weight mattered now. Every extra gram would be another reason to fall. She checked her sidearm, snapped the holster closed, and then moved. The first few steps across the open slope were the worst. Every instinct screamed at her to dive back into cover, to flatten herself into the snow and pretend to be part of the landscape. But she forced herself forward, knees high, boots crunching into crust. She kept her body low, her torso angled toward the cliff, making as small a target as possible. The wind was with her for the moment, pushing snow down from above, creating a curtain of white haze that helped obscure her movement. The enemy gunners, focused on the thicker mass of bodies around the wrecks, did not immediately notice the single figure breaking off. Halfway across, she heard a round crack the air to her left, close enough that she felt it as a pressure wave. Then another. Someone up there had seen something. She didn't look back. Looking back made you slow down. Her boots hit the first rock of the goat path. The snow layer thinned abruptly, revealing gray stone slick with ice. She grabbed a protruding ledge with one hand, nearly slipping. The rifle banged against her back. Up. The path hadn't been made for people like her. It was the kind of route she'd seen mountain shepherds and smugglers use. Narrow, treacherous, hugging the rock so closely that in places it disappeared entirely and had to be guessed. It zigzagged, doubled back, squeezed through notches barely wider than her shoulders. Below, the kill zone continued to burn. The squad's rifles answered the ridges in sharp, defiant bursts. The mortars kept dropping, if slower now, probing for movement. After the third switchback, her breath was a constant rasp and her thighs burned. The air thinned with altitude. The cold didn't care. It clawed at her face, finding any exposed skin and biting it. She planted her left boot on a lip of rock, shifted her weight, and reached up with her right hand to grip a higher hold. As she did, something slammed into the cliff face a meter above her head. The sound was different, deeper, harder, not a rifle round. The rock exploded into shards, spraying her with fragments. One shard tore across her cheek, hot and sharp. Another smashed into the main lens of her scope. She flinched, almost losing her grip. For a terrifying second, the world tilted and she felt herself fall, boots scraping for purchase. Her right hand found the next hole by instinct. She pressed herself against the rock, heart pounding, waiting for the follow-up shots. They didn't come. The shooter had fired at the movement, guessed the range, and then lost her in the tangle of rock and snow. Slowly, she exhaled, blowing steam onto the cliff. Carefully, she shifted enough to look down at her rifle. The scope lens was a spiderweb of cracks. A tiny hole, where a fragment had punched through and then stopped, had formed near the edge. When she lifted the rifle and peered through, the world beyond was fractured, warped, the reticle split into ghost lines. "Perfect," she whispered, wiped blood away from her cheek with a sleeve, and almost laughed. Something hysterical bubbled in her chest, but she smothered it before it could get out. Equipment fails. You adapt. She swung the rifle around and, bracing it against the rock, flipped the scope caps open to see if any part of the glass was salvable. The damage was centered near the top. The lower quadrant of the lens, where her eye could align if she adjusted, was still mostly intact, though spider cracks threatened to spread. She unclipped the quick mount and slid the scope off, checking the backup iron sights beneath. They were simple, crude, and designed as a last resort. At the ranges she'd be shooting from once she reached the upper ridge, they would be barely adequate. She waited. Damaged magnified glass with a warped picture that she knew intimately, or clean irons on a rifle meant for something else. She remounted the scope. "Work with what you know," she muttered to herself. "Not with what you wish you had." She tore a strip from a cloth tied to her vest and wrapped it around the cracked area, tightening to keep any more glass from falling out. It wasn't pretty, but it was something. Above her, the sky had shifted. A rippling curtain of cloud was advancing, dimming the harsh midday light, softening the edges of the peaks. She resumed her climb. The goat path narrowed, hugging the cliff so tightly that she had to flatten herself and shuffle sideways at times, boots feeling for hold she couldn't see. In one spot, a slab of ice had formed where meltwater had refrozen. She had to move across it in a slow, deliberate series of tiny steps, weight centered, every muscle screaming in protest. The sounds of the battle below grew more distant, more muted, a background roar behind the wind. Occasionally a mortar thump or a particularly heavy burst of machine gun fire would roll up and echo around her. But for the most part, she was in a different world now. Up here, snow fell in delicate veils, swirling around rocks. The only footprints were old, wind-softened, belonging to someone who had walked this path in a calmer time. As she skirted a shallow bowl above the valley, she saw the shepherd's hut again, but from above this time. Smoke curled lazily from the stovepipe, faint but visible. Around it, a cluster of figures moved. She lowered herself behind a boulder and raised the rifle, peering through the fractured scope. Through the magnified, cracked circle, the scene resolved in pieces, an armed fighter in snow camouflage standing guard near the door, another man hauling a crate toward a sled, a third in heavier gear fiddling with a crate's lid. And beside them, staggering under the weight of a box almost as big as his torso, was a local teenager. His jacket was too thin for the weather, his cheeks hollow. His eyes darted in panic toward the valley, as if he could feel the violence raging below. Nadia's finger found the trigger, then froze. The memory of Kestrel slammed into her, the girl in the window, the infant on her hip, the split second in which she'd weighed the shot and chosen not to take it. Her stomach lurched. For a moment the cracked scope lens showed her two scenes at once, mountain and city, teenager and woman, crates and balcony. The moral math was different here. This boy wasn't a shield being used in the middle of an active firefight. He was a forced laborer, maybe pressed into carrying their stolen goods. Shooting at the hut now, trying to take out the fighters in the limited visibility, risked hitting him. "What are they moving?" she whispered, forcing herself to analyze instead of freeze. She shifted her aim, following the crates. One of them had a faint logo stenciled on it, the same kind she'd seen in supply depots. Medical, ammo, equipment. Another bore plane markings. Her gut said the hut wasn't just a shelter. It was a staging point, a little logistics node feeding the ambush above. The presence of a local coerced kid meant the enemy had feelers in the villages below, that this hadn't been thrown together overnight. They'd planned this for days, weeks maybe. They'd known the route. They'd known the timetable. The green case wasn't just any prize. Their timing was too precise. She eased her finger off the trigger. Shooting now would scratch an itch but accomplish little. She had bigger pieces to knock over first. "Next time," she whispered to the phantom of Kestrel, "we do this differently." She adjusted her route, angling away from any trajectory that would force her to fire down toward the hut. If she could reach an angle where her shots would be directed away from that structure, she could kill the fighters using it as cover without risking the boy. The path steepened again, climbing toward a narrow saddle in the ridge. Her world shrank once more to hands, feet, breath. The rifle rode heavy on her back, a constant reminder of why she was up here. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably only minutes, she hauled herself onto a precarious outcrop overlooking both the valley and the opposite wall. The view hit her like a blow. Below, the squad looked tiny, ants crawling around the wrecks. Smoke from burning fuel drifted in ribbons across the snow. From this vantage, she could see the full layout of the ambush. The machine gun pits on both ridges, cleverly staggered so their arcs overlapped. The mortar tube tucked behind a rock formation, its crew loading with mechanical efficiency. The line of trenches connecting positions, allowing fighters to move under partial cover. And there, just where her earlier instincts had pointed, lay a cluster of camouflage tops tucked into a fold of the south ridge. Beneath them, she could see the angular outline of equipment cases and the stubby shapes of antennas poking through carefully cut holes. The jammer, the nerve center. Even from here, she could see the faint shimmer in the air around it, a distortion too regular to be a trick of heat. The generator's exhaust vented into a hastily dug channel, dispersing heat signatures downslope, making it harder for distant eyes to pick up. From up here, the geometry made sense. They weren't trying to obliterate the squad outright. The machine guns and mortars were herding them, nudging them along a path of least survival toward a narrow bend where the walls closed in further. There, she could see fresh snow mounded in unnatural shapes, likely more mines, more charges, maybe a capture team waiting. Alive, not dead, she realized. They want them alive. The green case was valuable, sure, but so were living prisoners, especially one radio specialist like Tully, who knew how their network worked. A propaganda coup, interrogation material, technical intel. 2 prizes for the price of 1 trap. The enemy's competence pressed on her chest like a weight. They'd done their homework. They'd rehearsed. They were executing well. The only thing they hadn't accounted for was someone being stubborn enough to climb above their carefully drawn box. Her fingers were numb as she shrugged out of a pack and dropped to her belly. The rock was rough under her front, the snow around it thin and hard. The wind knifed across the outcrop, threatening to push her over the edge if she lifted too high. She slid the rifle off her back and laid it in front of her, barrel over the lip. The cracked scope looked back up at her like an accusing eye. She dug into her vest and pulled out the spare magazines, lining them up in the snow like little tombstones. In her head, she began assigning each one to tasks. Magazine 1, sniper and spotter, if she could find them. Magazine 2, heavy guns. Magazine 3, mortars. Magazine 4, jammer. Magazine 5, half spent already from her time on the valley floor, would be her contingency. Rationing bullets felt obscene with so many people shooting so much metal everywhere below. But her role wasn't volume. It was precision. Force multiplication. Make the right rounds count where they'd hurt the most. The wind gusted, spraying ice crystals across the glass. She wiped it gently, took a shallow breath, and settled her cheek on the stock, the familiar smell of oil and cold metal grounding her. "Okay," she whispered to no one. "Let's restart this fight." Below, in the valley she'd left behind, Captain Rourke was shouting into a dead radio and ordering a terrified private to go punch a sniper who wasn't there. Up here, on a narrow ledge where any misstep meant a fall that would leave nothing but a red smear in the snow, Corporal Nadia had finally found a place where she could see the whole board. It was time to start taking pieces off it. From Nadia's perch, the valley resembled a map laid out on a table, except the pieces were moving, and the table shook with every explosion. She forced herself to ignore the urge to fire immediately. Scattered targets were everywhere, fighters darting between pits, machine gunners hunched behind shields, a mortar crew working in rhythm. Any one of them was tempting. Any one of them would be a satisfying, if temporary, removal. But she'd run out of bullets long before they ran out of bodies if she fired that way. Target ladder, she reminded herself. Start at the top and work down. The enemy sniper was last on her list, but first in her mind. A good counter-sniper, positioned right, could detect and neutralize her quickly. And whoever had put that neat hole near her scope and chipped the rock was no amateur. She swept the ridges through the cracked glass, ignoring the main gun pits. She looked for subtle tells, a slightly darker shadow where someone had cut a shooting slit, a faint shimmer where breath condensed, a rock that didn't quite match its neighbors. There, on the north ridge, just below a twisted pine clinging to the slope, a slab of stone with a horizontal crack, too straight for natural fracture. Through that crack, every minute or so, she saw the tiniest flicker, an eyelash-length disturbance in the snow mist. She settled the reticle on the crack, adjusting for distance and wind by feel more than by measurement. The scope's distortion made lines curve slightly. She'd have to aim off from where instinct told her. "First one's for you," she whispered. She waited for the wind to ease. Down in the valley, a mortar detonated somewhere close to her squad. A plume of snow rose and slowly fell. The wind dropped for half a heartbeat. She squeezed. The rifle bucked into her shoulder with a familiar, solid thump. The sound of the shot was sharp and immediate in her little world, then rolled down into the valley a second later. Through the scope, she saw the crack in the rock bloom with a small puff of dark as something behind it jerked back and disappeared. She didn't wait to confirm. She shifted a fraction, enough to bring the area just behind the rock slab into view. The spotter lay sprawled in the snow, half visible, red soaking into white. The rifle beside him pointed uselessly at the sky. One down. The unseen counterwatcher who'd made the valley floor lethal just lost his place. Before the echo faded, she shifted again. Two bodies had been pressed close to that position. One would be the sniper, the other his spotter or radio man. With the shooter gone, the spotter was nothing more than an extra set of hands. He reached for the fallen radio handset, instinct still trying to do their job even as his body registered the impact. Her second shot took him mid-movement. The radio flew from his grip, arcing in slow motion before disappearing into powder. On the valley floor, the change wasn't immediately obvious. The machine gun still snarled. The mortars still thumped. But one set of invisible eyes that had been calling corrections was now blind. Nadia's heart hammered, but her breath stayed steady. She worked the bolts smoothly, feeling each casing eject, each new round chamber. The routine motions calmed the part of her brain that kept trying to glance at the dwindling magazines lined up beside her. Next rung. She swung the scope toward the nearest heavy machine gun nest that covered the squad potential escape route. The gun was set behind a rock lip, its barrel and shield protruding. The crew worked in harmony, gunner on trigger, loader feeding belts, another fighter spotting. From below, all they'd see was the barrel and the constant brilliance of tracer lines. From above, Nadia saw the back of the gunner's neck every time he leaned into the weapon. She placed the reticle just beneath his helmet rim and waited. Wind. Pulse. Exhale. Crack. The gunner snapped backward, arms flying. The heavy weapon's muzzle jerked skyward, sending rounds into empty air. The loader froze, then lunged to grab the grips, trying to bring the weapon back into line. Her next shot hit him in the shoulder, spinning him into the pit wall. The machine gun's barrel sagged, then slipped from its mount, falling into the snow like a metal snake. Down below, Havel saw the change first. "Right guns down," he shouted, grabbing the collar of the nearest soldier. "Now, move right. Use that gap. Go, go, go." The squad, conditioned by drills and held in place only by the storm of fire, surged toward the newly opened sliver of relative safety. They threw smoke grenades, the canisters hissing as gray plumes rose and spread, adding another layer of obscurity to the already swirling air. Rourke felt the machine gun snarl shift, its previous brutal consistency suddenly full of gaps. "Whoever's doing that, keep doing it," he muttered, then louder, bound back by teams. "Use the smoke. Stay low." He still didn't know where the shots were coming from. The idea that it might be Nadia hadn't yet crossed his mind. Last he checked, she'd been a frozen silhouette behind a rock. On the south ridge, the enemy commander was not so slow. His name didn't matter, his competence did. He'd grown up in these mountains, carried a rifle longer than some of his fighters had been alive, and had spent weeks shaping this ambush with patient hands. From his vantage point near the cluster of tops, shielded by rock, warmed by the generator's hum, he watched the impacts through binoculars. He saw the sniper and spotter on the north ridge fall in a pattern that screamed external shooter. He watched one of his machine guns lurch and then die for no obvious reason. He tracked the angles. He saw where the shots had to be coming from. Not from the valley floor. Not from the opposite ridge, where his own guns fired. From somewhere behind his entire setup, high and offset. He swore softly and snapped his binoculars shut. Behind, he barked to his adjutant, stabbing a finger toward the rear ridge. "We have a shooter behind us. Get the climbers up. Take the drone." A small team of fighters in lighter gear scrambled to obey, grabbing coils of rope and carabiners. One snatched up the compact quadcopter drone resting on a fold-out table. The drone lifted into the air with a high-pitched whine, rotors chopping the thin mountain atmosphere. It rose above the ridge, then tilted toward the direction the commander had indicated, its camera scanning for heat and movement. Nadia heard it before she saw it. A mosquito were overshadowing the lower battlefield's roar. "Of course," she murmured. "Can't make it too easy." She swung the scope toward the south ridge, eyes scanning for the mortar crew. They were nestled in a dip, shielded on three sides by rocks. The tube angled upward like a stubby finger, one man dropping shells into its throat while another adjusted elevation. Every few seconds, the observer at the rock knob behind them called corrections into a headset. Only now, there was no voice. The observer lay crumpled, throat a dark stain in the snow. Without him, the crew hesitated. The loader paused with a shell in hand. Unsure. There. Vulnerability. She dialed a minor correction by feel. At this range and angle, the cracks in her scope mattered more, bending straight lines into slight curves. She'd have to aim a little off-center to compensate. The wind gusted again. Snow swirled. The drone's buzz grew louder. She waited for a tiny easing in the gust pattern. As she did, she saw the loader glance up, eyes narrowing, as if he'd heard something strange in the mountain wind. She fired. The round caught him in the chest, dropping him onto the tube. The shell in his hands clattered away, rolling into the dip. The remaining crewman flinched, scrambling to drag his fallen comrade away, exposing himself. Her next shot took him through the shoulder, spinning him into the rock. The mortar fell silent. For the first time since the ambush started, there were no new impacts walking across the snow near the squad. In the valley, the absence of those thumps felt like a miracle. Rourke noticed. "Mortar's off," he shouted. "Use it. Move. Move." He saw his people shift, no longer frozen in place by the constant threat of sudden, random death from above. They bounded in pairs, one covering while the other ran, leapfrogging their way toward a rough defile that might, if they were lucky, lead to a narrower section of the valley they could flank through. "Who the hell is helping us?" muttered one of the privates between gasps. "Angels." "Shut up and run," Havel grunted, hauling Tully's stretcher along with help from another soldier. Angels don't shoot like that. Up on the ridge, Nadia's chest ached. She realized she'd been breathing more shallowly than she thought. She forced herself to draw a deeper, slower breath. Her fingers had gone beyond numb to something else, an absence of sensation that made reloading into a task of sight, not feel. She glanced at her magazines. 2 full, 1 half, 1 nearly empty. She'd never liked math. The drone crested the ridge line now, its little body a dark cross against the paling sky. Its camera whirred, adjusting as it scanned. The operator on the south ridge manipulated the controls with practiced ease. It wasn't close enough yet for her to take a shot with any reasonable hope of hitting it. But if it got a lock on her thermal signature, every gun up here would swing her way. She had to accelerate the ladder. No time to systematically dismantle every pit. She had to go for the knife cluster. Her scope swung to the tops. Up close, they were a mess of snow, camouflage cloth, and cables. Antennas stuck up at odd angles, their tips sized. Underneath, she saw the squat bulk of a generator, its exhaust routed through a trench and out a vent halfway down the slope. A portable rack bristling with electronics sat beside it, a tangle of wires leading to a case. The jammer. Destroying it wouldn't kill anyone directly, but it would tear a hole in the invisible blanket smothering their calls for help. She lined the reticle up on the generator's fuel intake, a pipe running from a jerrycan into its side. Hitting the pipe wouldn't do much. Hitting the can would, but the can was mostly hidden by a canvas flap. Wind. Exhale. Shut. The round tore through the canvas, punched into the jerrycan, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then fuel sprayed out like an opened artery, splattering across the hot housing of the generator. The liquid ignited in a sudden whoosh, orange flame licking up the side. A second later, something inside ruptured with a bang, sending shards of casing outward. The antennas jutted, their lights flickering and then going out. The hum that had been a constant undercurrent in that part of the ridge stuttered and died. Down below, Tully's radio, lying half-buried in snow but still powered, suddenly screamed to life in Nadia's ear. Frostbite 1. This is White Base. We are reading heavy interference drop. Say status. Say status, a voice yelled through the static. Tully, shock ghosting his features, fumbled for the handset with blood-slick fingers. Havel shoved it toward his mouth. This is Frostbite 1, Rourke bellowed, grabbing the MIC when Havel thrust it at him. Troops in heavy contact in White Pass. Ambushed. Coordinates to follow. He rattled off grid numbers, muscle memory overriding panic. We are pinned but maneuvering. Request immediate fire support on ridges north and south. Danger close. I repeat, danger close. The line crackled, but for the first time, clear words came back. Copy. Frostbite. Stand by for steel on target. You have a 10-minute window before interference, likely resumes. Confirm ability to mark friendlies. Rourke looked at the smoke drifting in the valley, the burning vehicles, the chaos. Negative on precise markers, he said. We're moving to secondary defile east. Adjust fire by our corrections. We've got someone up there taking out key nodes. Coordinate with them if possible. White Base didn't reply to that last part. They had no idea who someone up there was. The enemy commander did. From his position, he watched the generators spit flame. The radios on his belt and on the table in front of him lost their comfortable blanket of noise. For a moment, he could hear distant chatter that wasn't his. He realized, with a clarity born of years of fighting people with better tech, that the window had opened. For them, not for him. Get that drone on the ridge now, he snarled. Whoever's up there, they die first. The drone operator's fingers flew. The little machine dipped, accelerating toward the outcrop where heat signatures had spiked with each shot. Nadia saw it coming. It was close enough now. 50 meters, then 40, a black star with spinning limbs. She knew she'd only get one chance. Hitting a fast-moving drone at that distance, in this wind, with a cracked scope, was a stupid shot. She did it anyway. She rolled off her belly into a half-kneel, braced the rifle against her thigh, and tracked the drone through the distorted glass. It bucked in the wind, its path jagged. She let it, aimed not where it was but where it would be, and squeezed. The round passed close enough that for a second she thought she'd missed. Then one rotor jutted, one arm snapped, and the little machine spun out of control. It pinwheeled, wobbling, then crashed into the snow just below her perch, breaking open with a pathetic crunch. For one glorious heartbeat, the ridge was hers alone. Then every rifle that could bear turned toward her. The rock around her erupted as rounds slammed into it, throwing up splinters and dust. Chips of stone stung her face. One bullet smacked into the stock of her rifle, numbing her hands. Another grazed the edge of her helmet. She dove flat, pressing herself into the meager cover of the outcrop. The magazines lined up beside her scattered, one tumbling dangerously close to the edge. Her fingers scrabbled, grabbed it just before it slipped into space. "Not today," she hissed, dragging it back. She jammed it into the rifle, rolled onto her side, and fired blindly toward one of the pits that had opened up. She couldn't take careful shots now. She could only snap fire enough to make them duck, to keep their arcs misaligned. Below, the first of the supporting rounds came in. They weren't artillery shells in the old sense. These were precision-guided munitions dropped from high above, riding coordinates and corrections rather than dumb trajectories. They screamed in from a sky that was starting to cloud, trailing thin tails.